Hello friends, and welcome to this edition of a Walk in the Garden Bible study. This is part 1 in our study of Genesis chapter 25. And so just letting you know, we're kind of hitting a milestone here because it was 3 years ago in the month of January in 2017 that I started this Genesis Bible study series. And so it's taken 3 years just to get halfway through the book of Genesis. But as I said from its inception, we're not in a hurry. We're taking it verse by verse. It's an in-depth Bible study. And so will it take us another 3 years to get through the rest of the book? Well, I highly doubt it. There was a lot of ground to be covered at those first few chapters. And I don't think it's going to take as lengthy of a period to get through the rest of the book. But even if it does, we're going to go through it thoroughly and in depth, and we're going to study it together. And we'll take it as time permits. So just want to let you know about that. And what we're going to pick up on here today is we're going to finish off those verses of chapter 24. We left off with verse 53 of chapter 24. And so today we're going to pick it up in verses 54 to 61. And if you remember last time, we saw where Abraham's servant, and you remember the story, they'd met Rebekah and she'd taken them into their household. They met the family, and she had consented to go with them to go and be Isaac's wife, and so thusly fulfilling God's mission, or the mission that they'd carried out for on behalf of Abraham via God's guidance and direction. And so here we read, "And they did eat and drink, he and the men that were with him, and tarried all night. And they rose up in the morning, and he said, Send me away to my master. And her brother and her mother said, Let the damsel abide with us a few days, at the least 10. After that she shall go. And he said unto them, Hinder me not, seeing the Lord hath prospered my way. Send me away, that I may go to my master. And they said, We will call the damsel, and inquire at her mouth. And they called Rebekah, and said unto her, Wilt thou go with this man? And she said, I will go. And they sent away Rebekah their sister, and their nurse, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant, and his men. And they blessed Rebekah, and said unto her, Thou art our sister. Be thou the mother of thousands of millions, and let thy seed possess the gate of those which hate them. And Rebekah arose, and her damsels, and they rode upon the camels, and followed the man, and the servant took Rebekah and went his way." And so here we see the rest of the encounter. You know, they'd spent the night there at Rebekah's family's household, Abraham's brother and all of his kin that were there. They'd taken them in, they'd given them to eat. We saw how the servant had related his entire account to the brother and the father and the other members there, and just laid it out. And we saw where it was pointed out that it wasn't just his desire, it wasn't just Abraham's desire for Isaac to take a wife of of his kindred, and it wasn't just by remarkable circumstance that they had just met Rebekah that particular day at that particular moment, and that all these things just magically or mysteriously worked out. But it was pointed out that it was all directed and orchestrated by God, by the Lord himself, and that the finger of God was on the matter. And so we saw where Laban and Nahor, and they recognized that, and Bethuel, and they established, they said, well, how can we argue or say anything against the will of God? Because it's obvious, it became obvious to them right away that this was the will of God for this to take place. And so we saw where the servant had left it up to the family to make that decision. He said, well, whether you say yea, it'll be yea. If you say nay, it'll be nay. But let me know if my mission is prosperous and if you're going to deal kindly with my master. I just need to know. And so here we see the rest of that encounter. And one thing that we do note here and notice is that, you know, if you recall, Isaac is not even here. He's not even present. He's not even going to have an influence on selecting his own wife, because Abraham was wise in his maneuver. He knew how easily Isaac could be influenced. He knew how easily the flesh might talk over the spirit. And he knew that if God was in control and he sent his trusted servant, that he would find the proper and the right wife, but most of all, the God-selected wife for Isaac. And so that's what he did. But he wasn't with this entourage. Isaac wasn't there. He didn't go with his father's servant to look for a wife. Rather, they went themselves under the guidelines of the divine oath that was taken, and they were going with divine guidance, and they were on a divine mission. It was a holy thing. And they would be responsible for finding Isaac the perfect wife. And now it was that they have discovered her. Now that they have discovered her, they are wanting to make haste to take her back to meet the family. And we discussed that a little bit last time too. I mean, not only the fact that he knew that it was his tasking once he found her is to just not delay, but to get back. But he also knew that Abraham and Isaac would be patiently waiting on them to return to see if God had prospered their journey. And then also we thought maybe, just speculated that maybe in the back of the servant's mind, he didn't want to delay because there's always that potential that something could come up to prevent her from wanting to go with him. I mean, she could change her mind. The family would have time to kind of talk to her and consider. And then you know how it is when somebody's going to depart. You've got kids that want to depart to go to the military, or maybe they're going off to college, or they got a job offer somewhere out of state and they got to move away. Well, it's, that departure is a hurtful thing. It's a sorrowful thing, and it's a hard thing to let go of a family member that's been living with you all their life. And so there could be some second guessing involved. There could be some talking them out of it, you might say. And so certainly he didn't want to have, any time factor added in to permit such a thing to happen. And so they spent the night there, and they rose up early, and he made his desires known right away. After they had a little bit of breakfast and had their bags packed, he said, "Okay, let's go. Send me away to my master." And he reiterates that multiple times. His master was impatiently waiting for the return. He had been directed, when you find her, bring her back to me again, and immediately. They didn't have time to spare. And just as most families would be, we see their response. They wanted her to possibly go. They weren't talking against it, but they weren't in any great hurry for her just to immediately pack her bags and leave. They rather thought maybe things would be better if, just to think things through perhaps, and at least spend some additional quality time with the family before she leaves them forever, and at least have a little time just to, cement their relationships. What do they tell him? They say, "Well, let the damsel abide with us a few days." What's a few days? Well, at least 10 days. And after that, she shall go. So they make the commitment to the servant, and they had consented to the marriage, but they were sorrowful for her leaving. It would be with great reluctance that they would send her away. And when the servant says, "Send me away," well, he's not referring to just himself and his other servants that are with him, but he's including Rebekah in the equation. When he says, "Send me away," he's like, well, give me what I came for, and we're going to be on our way immediately. I mean, this is what we agreed to. You said you were fine with it. And so their answer was to call Rebekah out. They said, "Well, in that case, let's call the damsel out. Let's hear from her mouth if she's ready to go right now. And we'll use that as the catalyst to make our decision. We'll let her make the final say. And we'll see how she feels about the situation. We'll get her take on it. And if she's willing to let go, we'll let her decide." What do they say? They say, "Wilt thou go with this man? Are you ready to go with him, Rebekah?" And what was her reply? Just simply, "I will go." She not only consented to go, but she was consenting to go immediately. She was ready. And so thusly, what do we see next? Well, it says they sent her away. They sent her away with her nurse. So at least she was allowed to take a familiar maybe a relative or just a servant with her, somebody that had been with her, that had known the family. And it was just as if she had a family member going with her. So she wasn't totally going to be isolated from everything that she knew and was familiar with. She would have a friend with her to give her aid, to give her help, and to, most of all, just to be her friend and to be able to fellowship with and to be able to confide in things with on their journey as they went on forward. And it's like taking part of her family, someone that she could confide in and relate to. So she wouldn't be totally on her own with this group of relatively strange people that she really didn't know anything about. And so it was a good thing to have her nurse along. But not only would the nurse, but she would have others travel with her as well. What does it say here? It says, and her damsels, and they rode upon the camels. So she had her own little band of servants, if you will, that were going to travel along and just be there for her to meet her needs, and also just to be, again, just having some familiarity toting along. And so we see the blessing that her family sends her off with. What do they say? Well, they give her words of wisdom, they give her words of encouragement, and they give her words that she could basically hang her future on. They say, thou art our sister, be thou the mother of thousands of millions. In other words, be prosperous, be abundant, and we put our hand of blessing on you. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you greatly. The Lord give you your quiver full of arrows, that you might have many children and many descendants, and that they might become a great people upon this earth. And they might do great and mighty things, and they might stand in the face of their enemies and be prosperous in the face of adversity and adverse times. Let them possess the gate of those which hate them. That she should be prosperous, have a great family, head up a great heritage, and that none should stand against her. That her lineage would be mighty upon the earth and stand firm on their faith and convictions. The Bible tells us that we're to be offensive against the devil, that we're to stand against the wiles of the devil, and that the gates of hell cannot prevail against us. And that's not talking about the defensive mode, that's talking about being in the offensive mode. That even though Satan may put up those fiery gates to try to prevent us from accomplishing our mission, that nothing shall withstand us if we have our faith in God. And so we see that we observe that her departure, and the Bible tells us that she followed the man, and the servant took Rebekah and went his way. And thusly they leave their family, they head on their journey, and they're heading back towards Abraham's home. And next we're going to pick it up in verses 62 through 67. And Isaac came from the way of the well, Lahairoi, for he dwelt in the south country. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field at eventide, and he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, the camels were coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she lighted off the camel. For she said unto the servant, what man is this that walketh in the field to meet us? And the servant had said, it is my master. Therefore she took a veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all things that he had done. And Isaac brought her into his mother, Sarah's tent, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So here we finally have the first meeting between Isaac and Rebekah. And for sure there was anticipation greatly on both ends. I mean, they were, if you could only imagine being basically promised to somebody, even to the point of being engaged to somebody, if you will, being their fiancé and never having once talked to them or met them. You don't know what type of person they are. You don't know what type of personality they have. You don't know, what they actually look like. And this has happened in the past. This has happened greatly in the past. Many times you've heard of arranged marriages. Or they used to have in the old Western days, they had mail order brides where people put an ad in the paper, and basically somebody would consent to come out and meet them and be their wife, and they would just show up on the stagecoach, not even having a picture, maybe having a couple letters, and that's about it. But you could only imagine the anticipation and maybe the apprehension and just the nervousness that would be taking place when you're finally going to have that first encounter for the very first time. And so here we see that meeting. And so they're riding, and Isaac's come back, from his duties. As his manner was, he was out in the field to meditate, perhaps to pray for the safety of the return of the servants with his bride, perhaps to pray for God's speed, perhaps just to seek God's will in every form of the matter there. And so that's what he was doing. And that's what his current situation was. He was a working man. He'd been out in the fields. Most likely had been tending to the herds or possibly working in the land, doing whatever it was that was needed. And at the evening tide, when it cooled down for the day and he was done with his duties, and before he turned in and before he took rest, he would go out in the field, and that's where he'd find a place to meditate. And that's not a bad idea. It's hard to find a place sometimes nowadays that's a quiet place. The Bible talks about finding things like your prayer closet, or finding a place of solitude. When Jesus prayed, we notice the great prayer that he made when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he went to that quiet place where he could be alone with the Lord, and he prayed and poured out his heart. And we know that, some people go out in the woods. Some people go out in the fields. Some people find a quiet place in their house. Some people can meditate under the stars at night, maybe go for an evening walk. And those are all areas that you can come closer to the Lord, and you cut out all of the riffraff, you cut out all of the things that would hinder you, the things that would maybe gain your attention, the things that would distract you. You just cut out all the distractions. Give up the phone, give up the radio, give up the TV. And it's just a quiet time where you can meditate. And it could be in your Bible reading time when you can meditate in the Word. Just between you and the Lord. And you're gaining that knowledge and gaining that wisdom without any distractions. Or it's the time when you're talking to the Lord. Or you're just meditating upon the things that need to be. Those are the quiet moments. And that's where we find Isaac at as they're approaching him. He's out in the field communicating with the Lord. And what does it tell us? It says at this time he was dwelling in the south country. He was making his way back from the way of the well, Lahairoi, which means the Lord seeth me. And where did we hear that title at before? Well, that was the reason it sounds familiar is that it should, because Lahairoi was the well where the Lord had met with Hagar and Ishmael when they were despondent in the desert. And the Lord showed them the well of water that was going to sustain them and keep them alive and look after and meet their needs. And it was the well of Lahairoi. And so here we see that they're still using the very same well. And it's still having a communication point in the Bible. And so what do we see? Well, it says he went out to meditate in the field at evening time. And, it could even be that fact that maybe he was still mourning the loss of his mother to some extent. He was still grieving, even though that was put behind him. They'd buried her. They'd put her to rest. And the mourning time was over, but perhaps he was still feeling that sense of loss. And just thinking about maybe reflecting back on past events, thinking about past, because it says that once Rebekah and he get together, that his heart was comforted after the loss of his mother. So it's seemingly like she was going to be the fulfillment of that void that he was still experiencing from the loss of his mother. And a lot of times that's what takes place. So he was offering his evening prayers, he was praying, he was meditating, and then it happened. What does it tell us? It says he lifted up his eyes, and what did he see? He saw the group. he saw the group approaching. And he pretty much probably suspected this could be them. Not 100%, but could it be? Would it be? Was this it? Were his expectations about to be fulfilled and about to come to pass? And what does it say that he saw? It says, behold, the camels were coming. I mean, that's a great statement. You know, he looks up, and what does he see? Behold, the camels are coming. And that means there's people with the camels. And you know, it's easily going to see the camels first, because you know, a lot of the camels, the average height of a camel is about 7 foot tall. So if you're going to see a shadow in the sunset, that's going to be the first thing you're going to see coming. You may not be able to see that person on the back. You may not be able to see those people walking on the ground. But if there's one thing you're probably going to see, it's probably going to be a camel coming your way. And so they were coming. And most likely that would be the first sighting. And you can rest assured that Rebecca had been looking diligent. She knew they were getting close. She knew they were getting near. And she'd been watching diligently as well. And so when she lifted up her eyes, she saw Isaac. And she, what does it tell us? It says she lighted off her camel because she now knew who this man was in the field. Because she had already inquired. She said, what man is this that walketh in the field to meet us? Who is this that's coming to meet us? And the servant had already said and already told her, he said, it's my master. But she didn't lose her manner and protocol. She didn't get too excited where she leaped off and just went running full force without thinking about herself. No, what does it say? It says when she heard that, she took her veil and covered herself, because this was a token of humility, it was a token of modesty, and it was a token of subjection. It was a good thing to do, especially when you meet somebody for the first time. You don't want to look like a harlot. You don't want to look like somebody that doesn't have any control over yourself. You don't want to look like somebody that I mean, you know, we see women in our public today and some of the ways that they dress, even in public, there's no shame. But likewise, there's no humility. There's no modesty. And it's almost like they're, you know, just wanting to flaunt whatever they can flaunt. And it's just really a sad thing, because what they don't realize is that it's really making a statement about their character. And I know character today doesn't seem to mean as much as it used to. It doesn't seem to have the influence or impact that it once did. People don't seem as concerned about it. But it still makes a statement. And you can ask people what they think of somebody, or what they, you know, and they'll tell you. And the way that people still admire when somebody dresses modestly, when they dress in humility and they just try to keep themselves under wraps but make themselves look attractive. And it just shows a little bit about their character. And so that's what she did. And thusly, after the servant relates the account, well, then the Bible tells us they get acquainted. And it kind of moves quickly, because we don't know how many days was spent. I don't think it was just immediately that they rushed to, you know, Sarah's tent and consummated the marriage. But they got to know each other. They got familiar with each other. They consented with each other, and that's what they did. They became husband and wife. And it's obvious that Isaac had been striving to get over the loss of his mother. And now, with the addition of Rebekah, and thereby they were able to cement and establish their own family, the void would be filled, for he was comforted after his mother's death. And so thusly we have the marriage and the consummation and just the togetherness now. A new unity has been established in the Abrahamic family, and God's will has been fulfilled, and this is a great stepping stone in the things that are to follow and the godly heritage that would follow, and that is the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah. And so with that, we're just going to briefly start getting into chapter 25, and we're not going to get too far in it today, but I want to at least give it a little bit of a jump start. And so we're going to be reading verses 1 through 10 of chapter 25. And here we read, Then again Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah. And she bare him Zimran, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua. And Jokshan begat Sheba and Dedan. And the sons of Dedan were Ashurim, and Letzurshim, and Luminim. And the sons of Midian, Ephah, and Epher, and Hanok, and Abidah, and Eldanah. All these were the children of Keturah. And Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac. But unto the sons of the concubines, which Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts, and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived eastward unto the east country. And these are the days of the years of Abraham's life, which he lived, 160 years. Then Abraham gave up the ghost, and died in a good old age, an old man, and full of years, and was gathered to his people. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, which is before Mamre, the field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Heth. There was Abraham buried, and Sarah his wife. So wow, now we're hitting into another major milestone in the Word of God. And we're going to see, after all these events, after all these things have transpired, after all these things that we've been reading about that have taken place, we're going to see the death of a great patriarch of God, and that is Abraham, the one that was called out from the Ur of the Chaldees, the one that's traveled around, went through all these different, many manifold blessings and events and communications with God Almighty, and now here it is coming to the end of his life. But it's pretty amazing to see how it ended up here. And so it was that Abraham lived after his son Isaac was married. Okay, now Isaac got married. Well, he lived an additional 35 years after Isaac got married. And it's also interesting to note that, it kind of sums up his life in three brief verses here. First of all, it says he took him, or the end of his life, I should say, it says it took him a wife, Keturah. It says he gave all he had to Isaac. And then it says he gave to the sons of the concubines gifts and sent them away. And then I guess one additional thing would be the fact that he died. But it's really interesting to note that, we knew that he was getting old, or he was considered old, well beyond years when he had the son Isaac. Because he was 100 years old at that time. And then Isaac has grown, and he got married, and he lived an additional 35 years, and during this additional 35 years, he takes him another wife. And not only that, but has concubines. So that's an amazing thing. It's almost mind-boggling. But it's as if the blessing that God gave him, an extra measure of blessing, when he was able to bear the son Isaac. And, God told him that he would have innumerable children, whether it be through Isaac, not only through Isaac, but also through Ishmael. And obviously even through these, the blessing just carried on through. So that's what we're going to talk about in our next lesson as we enter into chapter 25 here. And we're going to look at this wife that Abraham took. We're going to look at these concubines and talk about a little bit about the concubines and what those are, what kind of relationship they have, and then how that ties in with Abraham there. And then we're going to see after his death, the narrative's going to shift more over about Isaac. So we'll pick it up there in our next lesson. Hope you all are having a great day, and we'll look to see you again real soon. Thanks.